The hospital at 4 a.m. had a particular kind of quiet. Not peaceful, the absence of comfort. Fluorescent lights buzzed above the nurse's station, where a single nurse moved through paperwork with the economy of someone who had stopped expecting the night to be merciful. The corridor smelled of antiseptic and something beneath it, something cold and metabolic that no amount of cleaning could fully cover. I had been sitting in the chair outside room 204 for 40 minutes. I had stopped crying after the first 20. There was a white paper cup of coffee on the floor beside my left foot. I hadn't drunk it. I'd held it until it went cold and then set it down, then forgot about it when the doctor came out of Luca's room, speaking in the careful, measured cadence of someone managing bad news. Bacterial meningitis. Caught early, earlier than most, the doctor said, as if this were grace. Luca was on antibiotics. He was critical but stable. Those two words sat together in my chest like they had no business being in the same sentence. I had called Dante's number from memory. I hadn't known I still had it memorized until my fingers had already dialed. His man answered, not him. And I said, tell him his son is dying. Tell him the boy is asking for him. I waited for Dante to refuse. He hadn't. I heard the doors at the end of the corridor open before I saw him. It wasn't the sound, the doors were pneumatic, nearly silent. It was the shift in the room's atmosphere. The nurse at the station looked up. The orderly at the supply cart went still. The air pressure in the corridor changed. Or, I imagined it did. And then Dante Salvatore walked through, and I forgot, for one complete second, how to breathe. He was the same. That was the thing I hadn't prepared for. 2 years, and he was exactly the same. Tall and dark, and contained in that way of his, in a suit always slightly too formal for wherever he was, jaw set with the particular tension that other men showed in raised voices, and he showed in perfect stillness. He walked like every room he entered had already agreed to make space for him. He found me before he found the room number. Our eyes met across 50 feet of corridor, and something in my chest tore clean in half. He did not rush. That was the other thing I had forgotten. He never rushed. He covered the distance in measured steps and stood in front of me. I stood up from the chair because sitting felt like surrendering something I hadn't decided to surrender, and for a moment we just looked at each other. 2 years and nothing to say that could be said in a hospital corridor. Elena, he said. Low and quiet and carrying, the voice of a man who never needed to repeat himself. He's been asking for you, I said. My own voice came out steadier than I felt. He doesn't know who you are, but he's been saying papa for 3 hours, and I thought... I stopped, pressed my lips together. I thought you should know. Something moved across Dante's face. Gone before I could name it. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a white handkerchief, folded into a precise square, immaculate, impossibly unchanged from 2 years ago, and held it out to me. I stared at it. You've been crying, he said. I'm not crying now. Elena. I took the handkerchief. My fingers brushed his, and I pulled my hand back like the contact had burned me, which was both overdramatic and accurate. The cloth was warm from his pocket. I pressed it against the corners of my eyes out of some automatic response and caught, underneath the clean starched scent, something else. Cold night air, his cologne, the particular smell of a man who had come a long distance very fast. He had come fast. I hadn't expected that either. Which room, he said. 204. I paused. He looks like you. I should warn you. He has your eyes. Dante was quiet for a moment. Then, you should have told me. You told me to leave, I said. You told me not to contact you. I followed your instructions. He held my gaze. Something below his control pressed against it from the inside. Come, he said, and walked toward room 204. I followed. Because what else was I going to do? Inside, Luca slept. Even unconscious and wired to machines and terrifyingly small in that adult-sized bed, he was entirely himself. One fist curled near his chin, brow furrowed even in sleep, the stubborn set to his jaw that I had spent 2 years recognizing with a complicated feeling in my chest. Dante stopped in the doorway. He was very still. I watched him look at his son for the first time, and I did not know what to do with my own face. Luca stirred. His eyes opened barely, just a slit, drug-heavy and exhausted, and he looked at the tall figure in the doorway. Something in my small son's face went quiet in a way I had never seen. Not afraid. Not uncertain. Calm. Like something had arrived that he had been waiting for. His lips formed a word too small for sound. Later, much later, in the corridor dark while Dante sat beside Luca's bed holding his son's hand, and I was supposed to be getting coffee, I sat back down in that chair outside room 204. I did something I had not planned to do. I fell asleep. When I jolted awake from the sound of a nurse in the hallway, Dante was standing in the doorway of 204, watching me with an expression I recognized from a memory I had tried very hard to bury. He had looked at me exactly like this once before. 3 years ago, in his office, when he'd come back to find me asleep on his leather couch. Like something in him had stopped working. Like I had done something he didn't know how to account for. He looked away before I could speak. The handkerchief was still in my hand. It is 4:42 in the morning. My son is alive, and Dante Salvatore is 6 feet away, and 2 years gone, and I am in exactly the kind of trouble that sleep deprivation cannot explain. I had a life. This is what I needed people to understand. In the days and years between that night he said leave, and this morning in the hospital corridor, I had built a life, small and careful and completely mine. The kind of life that required no permission from anyone, that owed nothing to anyone's empire or name. I had an apartment on the 4th floor of a building on Via Pastrengo, with a window that looked out on a courtyard full of pigeons and the particular blue light of early morning. I had a pastry shop, Fiora di Farina, flour, because I was sentimental about names, 3 blocks from the apartment, barely wide enough for the display case and the prep table, and me. I had Luca's daycare schedule memorized, and the names of his 3 best friends, and the way he insisted on wearing the same green socks every single day until they disintegrated. At which point he cried for 40 minutes and then decided purple was his new favorite. I had a life. It was enough. I had made it enough. The morning after I made the call, I tried to remember this. Dante had stayed through the night. I knew because he was still there when I woke properly, not the half-sleep of the chair, but real gray dawn waking, sitting beside Luca's bed in the same suit, jacket folded over the arm of the chair, shirt sleeves pushed to his elbows, his hand resting on the mattress beside Luca's small ones, not touching his son's hand, simply close to it. I stood in the doorway and watched this for a moment longer than I should have. Then a man appeared at my elbow and said, in the voice of someone who had been awake for 36 hours and was processing it philosophically, "You must be Elena." He drove 140 kilometers to get here. I was in the passenger seat. I don't recommend it. I looked at him, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, a face that could have been intimidating if it weren't currently expressing something very close to philosophical suffering. He was holding 2 paper cups of coffee and a protein bar he regarded with the specific sorrow of a man who had been promised breakfast and was not getting it. "Marco Ricci," he said. "I handle security. Today I'm also handling coffee because the machine in this wing only does decaf, and I considered filing this as a workplace grievance." He handed me one of the cups. He said to give you this. He did not ask if you wanted it. I'm noting that, just for the record. I took the coffee. He knows I take it black. Marco looked at the cup, then at me. "Of course he does," he said, with the tone of a man who had expected nothing less and was tired of being unsurprised. He looked at his protein bar. Then, with the solemnity of a man making peace with his choices, he unwrapped it. "Are you always like this?" I asked. "I'm on a ketogenic diet," he said. "I'm never like this. This is a performance of wellness." He took a bite. His expression went deliberately neutral. "It tastes like a sandal," he said. "Despite everything. Despite all of it." I almost laughed. "Elena," Dante's voice from inside the room. Not loud, just audible and expecting to be heard. I walked in. Luca was awake, properly awake, looking at his father with the concentrated attention he usually reserved for trucks, and the television show about a train that he watched with religious commitment. Dante was looking back at him with an expression I didn't know how to categorize yet. The doctor says the antibiotics are responding, Dante said without taking his eyes off Luca. He'll need at least 4 more days in hospital. I know. They told me last night. After that, he cannot go back to that apartment. I went very still. That apartment is our home. That apartment is a building with 12 units and no security, and anyone who knows my name can find you inside 3 phone calls. He looked at me. I'm bringing you both to the compound. You don't get to make that decision. Elena, you threw me out. My voice was quiet, very controlled. You don't get to throw me out and then install us somewhere for your convenience 2 years later. That's not how this works. A long pause. No, he agreed. It's not. He held my gaze. I'm asking. The word sat between us like something fragile.
In 3
years of knowing Dante Salvatore, I could count on one hand the times I had heard him say that word and mean it. He didn't ask for things. He arranged them. He decided them. He made them happen and told you afterward. He was asking. In the doorway, Marco finished his protein bar with the air of a man attending a very intense theater performance, and said nothing. Luca looked between us with his father's absolute attention and said, with perfect 2-year-old timing, Papa. Dante went very still. It was the first time he had heard his son say the word. We'll discuss the compound, I said finally, after he sleeps. Dante nodded once. It was not agreement. It was the beginning of one. I watched Luca look at this tall stranger beside his bed, this man who shared his jaw, his dark eyes, his particular quality of stillness, and settle, just settle, the way he settled into sleep, into a bath, into something recognized. It was the most unsettling thing I had ever witnessed. Marco, Dante said, without looking away from Luca. Go home and sleep. I was going to observe, Marco said. Go home, Marco. I could stay in case you need. Marco went. I sat in the chair beside the bed. Dante sat in the chair on the other side. Between us, Luca fell back asleep with both our watches on him, one hand curled toward each of us. The men arrived by morning. Not visibly armed, they were too professional for that, in a hospital with cameras and civilian witnesses. But they stood in the corridor outside room 204, in suits that hung carefully over things heavier than shoulders, and they spoke to each other in the shorthand of men who didn't need the full sentence, because they had already decided the outcome. 2 years. I had spent 2 years teaching myself to forget what Dante's world looked like around its edges. I had done a reasonable job. I had told myself a story about a woman who made pastry and raised her son, and did not think about certain things late at night when Luca was asleep and the apartment went quiet. The men in the corridor dismantled that story efficiently. You could tell them to leave, I said to Dante, somewhere around mid-morning, when the third new face appeared outside Luca's door. I could, he agreed. He did not elaborate. You're not going to. Someone targeted my son, he said. The meningitis was not random. I turned fully toward him. Luca got sick, Dante. Children get sick. The strain of bacteria involved is not one that moves through standard community transmission. He said it the way he said most things, flat, factual, as if the information were simply the information, unconnected to the terror it contained. My doctor reviewed the cultures. Someone introduced it deliberately. The room went cold. I looked at Luca, who was conducting a one-sided conversation with a stuffed rabbit that Marco had produced from somewhere that morning, apparently out of guilt about the protein bar situation. Who would? I stopped. A stupider question had rarely been formed. I knew who. Anyone wanting to reach Dante through the softest possible target. I just hadn't known I was a soft target until this moment, which said something about how thoroughly I had lied to myself. We don't know yet, Dante said. We will. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you stay inside whatever space I put you. That is not, Elena. The way he said my name was not a command. It was barely even a request. Something underneath both things. With weight. Let me do this one thing. I looked at my son. I looked at the rabbit. I looked at the man I hadn't spoken to in 731 days, asking to do one thing. Fine, I said, but I need someone to go to my shop. He tilted his head. Fiora di Farina, via Pastrengo, 3 blocks from my apartment. My assistant Giulia opens at 7, but I have an order due for Thursday. A wedding cake, 3 tiers, cardamom and rose, and if I'm not there by Wednesday, she won't know how to handle the second layer temper. I saw his expression. The bride ordered it 6 months ago. I'm not ruining her wedding because you have a security situation. A pause. You have a wedding cake order, he repeated. I have several, actually. I also have a standing Tuesday morning order for a cafe on Corso Magenta, 4 dozen almond croissants. And if they don't get them, Marco, Dante said. Marco appeared in the doorway with the immediacy of a man who had been listening from 3 feet away. Already noted the shop address, he said. I'll send someone who can describe a croissant without sounding suspicious. Do you know what a croissant is? I asked. I know what a croissant was, Marco said, with quiet tragedy, before the diet. Luca found this very funny. He made a sound that was unmistakably a giggle, his first real laugh in 4 days. We all looked at him. Dante's expression did something I filed carefully away without examining directly. Later, when Luca was sleeping and Dante had stepped out for a call, I sat beside my son's bed and did what I always did when I needed to think. I took out the small notebook I kept in my bag, the one where I sketched recipe ideas, and began drawing a flavor profile for the wedding cake. Cardamom and rose. Cardamom needed to be high enough to cut through sweetness, but not so dominant it overwhelmed. Rose was delicate, easily lost. You had to build structure underneath it to let it stay present without disappearing. I was doing this when Dante came back. He stopped in the doorway and looked at the notebook and said nothing for a moment. You always did that, he said, when you were working something out. I make things when I'm anxious. I know. I looked up at him. He was looking at the notebook with something old in his expression, something that had been set aside and not examined. Dante, I said, why did you throw me out? The silence that followed was not empty, full of something he was deciding not to say. Not tonight, he said. It's been 2 years. I know how long it's been. He walked to the chair by the door and sat and laced his fingers together and looked at the floor. Not tonight, Elena. I went back to the recipe. But something in the room had shifted. The weight of a question that had been waiting 2 years to be asked, hanging now in the antiseptic air, waiting for an answer he wasn't ready to give. Outside in the corridor, one of his men said something low and quick. Dante looked up. His expression changed, the subtlest possible shift. The kind I had learned years ago meant the outside world had just sent a message he didn't like. Someone was already moving against us. They discharged Luca on the 4th day. He came home in the arms of a man he had decided, in the absolute irrational way of 2-year-olds, was the best person in the world. He had been working on this conclusion since the 2nd morning of his hospital stay, and had by now moved from cautious observation to outright tyranny, reaching for Dante the moment he appeared in the doorway, demanding to be carried with the imperious gesture of a small king, then falling. Asleep on his shoulder with the completeness of a person who had settled the matter. I watched Dante navigate this. I watched him stand very still the first time Luca grabbed at his collar and held on. I watched the careful way he adjusted his grip, like someone working with something irreplaceable, someone learning a new kind of weight. I did not say anything. The compound was 40 minutes outside the city, through roads that grew progressively quieter and then rural, and then through a gate set into a stone wall older than the building behind it. The building itself was not what I'd imagined. I had expected something fortress-like, all black glass and surveillance cameras. It was that, but it was also large and Italian and old in the way that old Italian things are old, with permanence that isn't aggressive, just present, like stone that has simply decided to remain. Rosa met us at the door. She was 60-something and small, and had the demeanor of someone who had seen everything and filed most of it under none of my business without losing warmth. She looked at Luca in Dante's arms and her face moved through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Madonna, she said softly. Then she looked at me and said, You look thin. Come inside. I'll make something. I don't need. Come inside, she said again, in the tone of a woman who had been disagreed with before and found it unconvincing. I went inside. Dante showed me the rooms he'd prepared. Luca's room had been assembled with a speed that implied either a dedicated team or someone who had done it personally at 3 a.m. A proper toddler bed, toys of the right age range, blackout curtains, a night light shaped like a moon. I stood in the doorway and looked at it and felt something complicated move through me that I did not name. The security here is layered, Dante began. I can see the security, I said. There are cameras at both ends of the corridor. I paused. And one above the door that's trying to look like a smoke detector. He looked at me. I paid attention, I said, when I was with you before. I paid attention to what your world looked like around its edges. Something moved through his expression. Not quite a smile. Something slower than that, and more careful. That evening, putting Luca to bed, I stepped out of the bathroom, and Dante was closer than I'd thought. My shoulder caught his chest, and we both went still in the hallway. He put a hand on my arm, steadying me, or from reflex I couldn't tell, and his fingers were warm through the fabric of my sleeve. We stood there for exactly 1 second too long. Sorry, I said. He didn't say anything. He let go of my arm with a deliberateness that felt like it cost him something. Then he walked back toward the east wing without looking back. I went to Luca's room and sat on the edge of the bed and tried to think about the recipe I was supposed to be modifying. Later, unable to sleep, needing my hands busy, I was in the kitchen with Rosa when Marco appeared. He was wearing pajamas printed with small dachshunds and holding a protein bar with the expression of a man who had lost a war with himself. I was going to eat this, he said, and then immediately feel bad about it. He sat at the kitchen island. Is she awake? He meant Sophia, the night nurse. Marco had spent the entire 4 days of Luca's hospital stay finding increasingly creative reasons to walk past her desk. Sophia doesn't live here, Marco. Right. He looked at the protein bar. I know that. He unwrapped it. I'm going to tell her I'm on a diet. It seems like the kind of thing she should know. How would that help? Rosa asked without looking up from her pot. Character, Marco said. Sacrifice. Self-improvement. You break the diet daily, I pointed out. The process matters. He took a bite. His face went neutral in the particular way of a man training himself not to react. Then he said, without looking up, does the boss always look at you like that? I set down the sugar I'd been measuring. Like what? Like you're something he's trying to solve, Marco said, something he broke and doesn't know how to fix, and won't ask for help with, because asking for help is not in the original programming. He looked at the protein bar with philosophical sorrow. This tastes like regret, he said. Good night. He left. Rosa continued stirring without comment. I measured flour I didn't need. Upstairs, somewhere in the hallways I was still learning, Dante Salvatore was almost certainly standing in a room full of surveillance feeds, making decisions that had nothing to do with me. I told myself I believed that. My hands kept measuring flour. I made Luca a tart on the second morning at the compound, mostly because he asked for something sweet and Rosa's expression when I offered to use her kitchen contained enough maternal energy that refusal felt impossible. Partly because I needed to think and baking was the only way I knew how to do it. Hands busy, mind working the problem underneath. The tart was simple, a dark chocolate base, bitter enough to make your mouth pay attention. A center layer of cherry cream, sweet and slightly acidic, sweetness with something underneath it. And the top, caramelized sugar, cracked thin, brittle in a way that looked like it would hold, but shattered at the lightest contact. I didn't name it. I was not Angela in my own head, turning desserts into emotional confessions. But I was aware, when I carried it to the table and watched Luca break through the top layer with his spoon, with the delight of a small person encountering texture, that I had made something that looked strong on the outside and kept the sweetest, most fragile part hidden in the middle. Rosa looked at the tart, looked at me, said nothing. Dante came in when I was cleaning up. He looked at the tart, then at Rosa, who had the expression of someone very deliberately not saying something. Then at me. "May I?" he asked. I handed him a fork. He tasted it and said nothing for a moment. Then, "You always made things that didn't look like what they were." I wasn't sure if he meant it as a compliment. "I need to know," I said. "I had been building to this for 2 days. I need to know why you threw me out." He set the fork down. "Elena, because I tried." My voice came out quieter than I'd intended. "After you said what you said and I left, I tried to reach you. Not you directly, because you'd told me not to. I called the main line. I called Marco. I was told you had given instructions, that you weren't accepting contact from me." I looked at him steadily. "You didn't give that instruction." He went very still. "I don't know who told you that," he said carefully. "Then something is wrong in your house," I said, "because someone spoke on your behalf without permission and kept something from you that you should have known." I paused. "What were you told about me? When you decided I was gone?" His jaw tightened. "Dante. I was told you had met with Edmondo Caruso's men." He said it like it cost him. "Twice. In locations I didn't know you had access to. That information about one of my operations reached Edmondo's table the week after." A pause. It was specific enough that it couldn't be coincidental. I stared at him. "I have never met Edmondo Caruso," I said. "I don't know his men. I had never heard his name until you just said it." My voice was perfectly level, and it was the hardest thing I had ever done. "Dante, someone set me up. Someone in your house who could intercept phone calls and fabricate meetings and make it convincing enough that you believed them over me." I watched something move through his expression, and that person is probably still there. He turned away from me and looked at the wall for a long time. I watched his hands. Still. With Dante, hands that were still meant something was working very hard behind them. "The thing I needed to tell you," I said quietly. "When I called, 6 weeks after I left." He turned back. "Luca," I said. One word. Let it land. A long, long pause. "You were pregnant," he said. "Yes." Another pause. He looked toward the rooms upstairs, in the direction of wherever Luca was. "You tried to tell me," he said. "I tried to tell you." He turned away again. The set of his shoulders was the architecture of a man adding things up and not liking the sum. I let him stand there. I went back to washing the bowl. Outside, the compound moved through its rhythms. Sun crossed the kitchen floor in slow panels. Luca was upstairs with Rosa, almost certainly trying to give the stuffed rabbit a bath. And somewhere in the organization that had surrounded us both, someone had fed Dante a lie that cost us 3 years and a child's first breath. I thought about what I knew. The intercepted call, the fabricated meetings, the timing, the precision, the particular access required to make it believable. Not Edmondo himself. Someone inside this house. I looked at the bowl in my hands. Betrayal, I thought. Not suspected anymore. Almost confirmed. When I looked up, Dante was watching me from across the kitchen with an expression I had not seen on him before, something beneath the control that looked, genuinely, like grief. "I'm sorry," he said. 2 words, not an explanation, not a defense. Just the plainest possible statement of what was true. I dried the bowl. "We have to figure out who it was," I said. "Yes," he said. "And then what?" He looked at me steadily. "And then we deal with it." Neither of us said the word together. But it was in the room. The shooting happened on a Tuesday evening. I know this because I was making dinner. Actually making it. Rosa supervising with the energy of someone who had decided I was capable but in need of oversight, and Luca had just been persuaded to sit down with his rabbit and a pile of blocks when the sound came. Not a gunshot. The particular sound of a compound's exterior window taking impact, a sharp crack, then safety glass spreading in a contained pattern. Then the alarm. Then a silence somehow louder than any of it. Dante was in the room in a time I couldn't account for. I didn't see him come in. He was simply there, between us and the window, and then Rosa had Luca in her arms and was through the door to the interior corridor, and I was still standing at the counter holding a wooden spoon like it was a useful object. "Elena." His voice was completely calm. That was the most frightening thing. "Move." I moved. He put me through the door with a hand on my back. Not rough, just directing, precise, and said something into a small earpiece I hadn't noticed until now. And then men I hadn't seen all day were suddenly present in every corridor. What followed, I understood only in pieces. He was efficient in a way I had never let myself fully process before. Short, controlled, utterly purposeful. No rage, no noise, just decision after decision made faster than I could track. Information came through the earpiece. Orders went out in the same breath, in the clipped shorthand of men who had practiced until choreography became instinct. 3 men had come over the south wall. None of them left through it. I found this out from Marco, who found me in the interior corridor an hour later with Luca asleep against my shoulder, and who had the specific expression of a man who had also been in a security breach but was prioritizing the update. "Everyone is fine," he said. "The kitchen window is not fine. Rosa is very upset about the kitchen window. And the men who came over the wall? Also not fine," Marco said. Then, realizing that wasn't comforting, "But we are. You are." Later, Dante's office. He was at his desk, jacket gone, and there was something dark on his shirt sleeve I clocked and deliberately looked past. He was on his phone, and when he saw me, he ended the call. "Luca?" he said first. "Asleep. Rosa has him." I closed the door behind me. "You're hurt. It's minor. Your sleeve is..." "Elena. Let me see." He looked at me for a moment in that way, evaluating something, running a calculation. Then, he pushed his sleeve up. It was a graze. Genuinely minor. Just above the wrist. But it was bleeding in a thin, consistent line, and he hadn't tended to it because he'd been tending to everything else first. I found the first aid kit and sat in the chair across from him and cleaned the graze with the focus of someone who needed her hands busy to stay steady. He let me. That was the thing. He let me. He sat still and watched my face while I worked and said nothing, which was very Dante, but there was something in the quality of the silence that was different, more open, like something had been lowered, not much, but measurably. "I'm sorry," he said, when I was almost done. I looked up. "I believed them over you," he said. "I didn't." He stopped. "You had never given me a reason, and I had a reason that came from inside my own house. I should have confronted you. I should have." "Yes," I said. "You should have." He absorbed that. "I know. I finished taping the bandage. I should have stood up. I should have gone back to the corridor, to Luca's room, to the careful geography I'd been maintaining since we arrived. I didn't. The room was quiet. The compound had returned to its organized stillness. Outside, his men were dealing with aftermath in ways I didn't need the details of. I was very aware of how close his face was to mine. "Elena," he said. His voice had changed. Something in it had surfaced, something he was used to keeping below. "Don't," I said. "Not yet." A pause. "Okay," he said. "Just that. No argument." I stood up, put the first aid kit back, walked to the door. At the door I stopped. "Fiamma," he said very quietly. Different from the hospital corridor. Warmer, something in it now that was not ownership. I turned. He held my gaze. Not calculating, not controlled. Just present. Just honest. "Thank you," he said, "for calling me." I went back to my son. But walking the corridor in the dark, I was aware that something in the evening had shifted in a direction I could not shift back. Alone in his office, Dante Salvatore pressed 2 fingers to the bandage on his wrist. The warmth of it. She didn't move away, he thought. Even in the hospital corridor with all her fear visible, for her son, for what came next, none of it had been for him. Even after everything. She looked at him with the particular quality that no one else in his world possessed. She looked at him without the film of fear that everyone eventually developed. That's why. He pressed the bandage. That's exactly why, from the very beginning. She was the only one who fell asleep. War had arrived. He understood war. She had no shape he could plan around. She was simply the size of everything. Rosa was hurt on a Thursday. Not by a bullet. This was not that kind of war. Not in its daylight hours. She was caught at the edge of a car bomb meant for the vehicle 3 spots ahead. She survived with a dislocated shoulder and a concussion serious enough that the doctor wanted to keep her for observation. She survived and was already arguing with the hospital staff about what constituted medical necessity by the time we arrived, and none of that changed the fact that she was in a hospital bed because her name lived near ours. Luca had cried when we told him. He stopped after 5 minutes and asked if she would still be there when he woke up, and when I said yes, he accepted this with the particular 2-year-old pragmatism that breaks your heart a little, and went back to his blocks. I did not cry. I sat beside Rosa's bed and held her good hand and let her be irritable at me about the hospital food, and I kept my voice even and my face neutral, and I thought, very carefully, about what I was doing here. That afternoon, Marco appeared in the doorway of my room. He had an expression I hadn't seen on him before, not his usual wry exhaustion. Something more careful. "Dante wants you to know," he said, "that there is a car at the south gate, fully fueled, a driver who doesn't know where you're going, a phone with a clean number, an account with enough to settle you and Luca somewhere comfortable for as long as you need." I looked at him. "He's telling me to go," I said. "He's telling you the door is open," Marco said. "There's a difference." "Probably. I'm honestly not sure he'd admit the difference, but I think he means it." He paused. He made me memorize that exact phrasing. He said it 3 times. I sat with this. "What do you think I should do?" I asked. Not because I expected Marco to know. Because he was the only person in the building I could ask without it costing me something. Marco looked at the ceiling. "I think," he said slowly, "that if you leave, you'll be safe. Edmondo will pivot. If you're not reachable, that avenue closes." He looked back at me. "And I think if you stay, this gets worse before it gets better, and there will be a cost I can't calculate for you in advance." "And Dante?" He was quiet for a beat. "Dante has been sitting in his office for 3 hours not making calls," Marco said. "He's never done that. Not in the 5 years I've worked for him." He looked at the door. "I think he's waiting to see what you do." He left. I sat in the room and looked at the wall, Rosa's face, the hospital bed, Luca asking if she would still be there when he woke up, Dante in his office, not making calls, the bandage on his wrist that my hands had put there. I thought about the woman I had been for 2 years, the woman who woke before 6 and opened a shop and made things people ate and were glad of, and raised a boy who wore green socks until they disintegrated, and called a man he'd never met Papa with the certainty of someone who had decided where home was. I had built that life. Alone. I had told myself it was enough. I thought about whether it was actually enough, or whether I had been very well trained to tell myself that story by someone who needed me to believe it. Then I got up. I walked to Luca's room. He was napping. The rabbit was tucked under his arm. I stood in the doorway and looked at him for a long time. I walked to the south gate. The car was there. Black. Unmarked. The driver looked straight ahead with the professional discretion of someone who had been specifically briefed on not making this harder. I stood at the gate for 3 minutes. The road beyond it was quiet. Ordinary. Went somewhere else. Somewhere without men at the south wall and car bombs, and a woman in a hospital bed, and a man sitting in an office with his own silence. Somewhere with almond croissants on Tuesdays, and a courtyard full of pigeons and a window that caught the particular blue of early morning. It also went away from the compound where my son was sleeping with a rabbit under his arm, away from a specific quality of stillness that settled into a room when Dante was in it, away from something I had not let myself name, because naming it meant deciding something about it. I turned around. I walked back through the gate. Nico, the guard who had started nodding at me with something approaching familiarity, watched me come back through without expression. "Never mind," I said. "As you say," he said. I went back inside. I knocked on Dante's office door. "Come in." he said. I opened the door. He was at his desk. He looked at me. In his face was that expression. The one from the hospital corridor, the one from Luca's room, the one that appeared when I did something he didn't know how to account for. I'm staying, I said, not because I can't leave, because I'm making a different choice. A pause. You understand what that means, he said. What it costs. I understand better than you thought I did, I said. That's always been the problem. He nodded once. Sit down, he said. Let me tell you what I know. I sat. Outside the gate, the road went somewhere quieter and easier. Inside this office, Dante Salvatore began to lay out the shape of the war we were both standing in. I was not the woman who had walked into his world by accident anymore. I had chosen it with both eyes open. They took me from the market. This is the part I am least proud of. Not because it wasn't what it was, but because I saw the window and didn't close it fast enough. I had gone with Marco because Luca had asked for a specific pasta, the small butterfly-shaped ones he'd become obsessed with at the hospital, and the compound didn't have them. Marco agreed because he said fresh air would do me good, and also because the market had a deli counter staffed by a woman he had been describing to me in increasing detail for the past week. We split up for 3 minutes. It took less than 3 minutes. I came to in a room I didn't know. Stone walls. Small window. The kind of cold that belongs to basements. My hands were not tied. This was the detail I focused on first. Either they were careless, or they were confident, and confidence in this context was the scarier option. I sat up. The room had a table. On the table, a bag. In the bag, basic provisions. Water, bread, a tin of something, and a small paring knife, the kind used for fruit. I took it, put it in the waistband of my jeans where my shirt would cover it, sat back down and thought about what I knew. I was alive. They wanted me alive. If they'd wanted me dead, the market would have been the place. They wanted something from me, which meant I had time. Time was what I needed. I was also a baker. I had been working with sharp things and heat since I was 17. My hands were not shaking. The door opened 3 hours later. The man was older than I expected. 60s, elegantly dressed. A face that had once been handsome and had become merely authoritative. He sat across from me and looked at me with something that was, genuinely, more curious than threatening. Elena Russo, he said. You're not what I imagined. Neither are you, I said. Edmondo Caruso, I assume. He seemed mildly amused. Dante taught you to recognize names. Dante teaches people things whether he means to. A pause. You know what I want. Information, I said. About him, probably personal rather than operational given this room. This is a conversation space. You want me to tell you something that matters to you? Not read you a ledger. He watched me with something sharpening in his expression. He threw you out, he said. Kept you from his son for 2 years. Willingly, you think? Because he's cruel? Or because someone told him a story? I kept my face still. I know about the information Vincenzo fed him, he said, reading confirmation in my silence. Vincenzo Ferrara has worked for me for 4 years. Not from cruelty. Dante killed his son. 7 years ago. The boy was caught in something Dante handled in the way Dante handles things. Vincenzo never forgave him. A pause. I didn't fabricate the meetings. Vincenzo fabricated them. I provided structural support. We agreed on a shared goal. You wanted to reach Dante through me, I said. I wanted him to understand certain kinds of loss, Edmondo said, with something that was not precisely cold. He doesn't. He never has. He studied me. And then his son became ill. And you called him. And now here we are. So what now? I said. That depends on what you're willing to tell me. I looked at him. I thought about everything I knew about Dante Salvatore, his house, his schedules, the rhythm of his world. I had paid attention. I had always paid attention. I thought about my son with the stuffed rabbit under his arm. Nothing, I said. I'm not going to tell you anything. He nodded slowly, unsurprised. I expected that, he said. I still had to ask. He left. The door closed. I got up. I looked at the window, too small for exit. But the hinges on the door were old. I had heard the give in them when Edmondo opened it, the sound of metal needing maintenance. And below the table, the stone floor had a gap along one edge where something had been installed and not properly sealed, an old drain or a conduit. Something that had an other side. I thought about what I knew. Cardamom and rose. You build the structure underneath to let the delicate thing survive. I began to work. When Marco found me 2 hours later, his face the color of chalk, moving at a speed that suggested he hadn't stopped since the market, I was already at the outer wall. I had worked the drain conduit loose and exited through the building's original foundation access, a passage that led out into a service alley. I was standing in the alley with the paring knife and no shoes, because I'd left them wedged in the door hinge to muffle the sound. "You're already out," Marco said. He stared at me. "You got yourself out." "Someone had to," I said. He looked like he might cry and also like he had never admired anyone more. "Dante," he started. "I know," I said. "Take me to him." On the drive, Marco said quietly. "Vincenzo called the compound. Told Dante he had information on where you were, that we needed to move. I think he was trying to walk Dante into something." "I know," I said. "Vincenzo works for Edmondo, has for 4 years." Marco went silent. He drove faster. Dante met me at the compound gate. He was moving toward the car before Marco had fully stopped it. I saw this through the window, the controlled velocity of a man who had been in one place and needed to be in another immediately, who had shed the pretense of pacing himself. He opened the car door. He looked at me. I don't know what my face was doing. Something complicated. Something that had been through a basement and a drain conduit and a service alley in the past 4 hours and hadn't settled into anything legible. He put both hands on my face. Just that, both palms, fingers spread, cupping my jaw. He turned my face left, then right, checking, inventory, the hands of a man who needed to confirm a fact before he could move past it. "Luca," I said. "Rosa has him. He's fine." His voice was very controlled. "You're not hurt." "I'm fine." "Elena, I'm fine, Dante." I put my hands over his. "Look at me." "I'm fine." He looked at me. Something in him released. Not dramatically, not a collapse. A specific kind of tension unknotting. One increment. His forehead came down against mine, and he stayed there for a moment, and I felt his breath even out. "You got yourself out," he said. "You would have gone in the wrong direction," I said. "Vincenzo was walking you into something." He pulled back. His expression had changed. "I know," he said. "Marco told me on the drive." "How long did you suspect him, since your conversation in the kitchen?" The timing of what he'd had access to. Things only a consigliere would know. He stepped back from the car, let me stand up properly. "I grew up with Vincenzo. He was my father's advisor before he was mine." I understood then the specific weight he was carrying. Not just betrayal. The grief of betrayal by someone you believed was a fixed point. "His son," I said. "Edmondo told me. 7 years ago." Dante was quiet. "I know," he said finally. "It doesn't change what he did." "But I know." We went inside. Luca ran to me from the living room with the rabbit under one arm and his arms outstretched, and the particular shriek of joy that 2-year-olds use when they've been waiting, and I caught him and held him and put my face into his hair and stood there longer than I probably needed to. When I straightened, Dante was in the doorway. He had the expression he got sometimes, the one I was still learning, the one that meant he was doing the accounting of something and not sure how to balance the ledger. Marco appeared from behind him. "Sophia texted me," he announced, to no one in particular. "She saw my name in the news alert about the market incident. She asked if I was okay." He held out his phone. "Is everything okay?" I saw the news. "Sophia." "She kept my number," he said. "She kept my number and she initiated contact. This is a development." He looked at the text with the expression of a man who has just realized the game was winnable all along. "Marco," Dante said. "I'm going," Marco said. But he was smiling, the first real full smile I had seen from him. It transformed his entire face. He disappeared into the corridor typing with great speed. I looked at Dante. "You have to deal with Vincenzo," I said. "Yes." "And Edmondo." "Yes." And then he was quiet for a moment, just looking at me with that particular quality. And then he said, "We talk about after, if you're willing." I looked at my son, who had fallen asleep against my shoulder in the 20 minutes since I'd picked him up, with the rabbit pressed between his cheek and mine. The way Luca slept. Completely, absolutely, with no reservation. The way he had always slept near Dante. Near me. "I'm willing," I said. Dante nodded once. He went to his office. I sat on the couch and held my sleeping son and thought about basements and drain conduits and the smell of Dante's hands on my face and how strange it was that the things you survive change what the word home means to you. In his office, Dante was making the calls that would end this one way or another. The compound settled into its nighttime sounds. Rosa moved through the hallway humming something low. Outside, the last pieces were assembling. Edmondo Caruso was not finished. The next move was coming. I held Luca. I did not pray, because I had never been good at prayer. I just held him, and waited for what came next, and told myself we had already survived worse. I almost believed it. The confrontation with Edmondo happened on a Saturday. This is the kind of detail that seems wrong. Violence feels like it should arrive on darker days, midweek in the rain. But it was a Saturday afternoon in late autumn, dry and cold, when Dante's men moved on Edmondo Caruso's Milan residence, with the precision of something planned long ago and, now, simply being executed. I wasn't there for most of it. Dante had been very clear about that, and I had been clear back that I wasn't going to argue with the parameters of a tactical operation I had no training for. I stayed at the compound with Luca and Rosa, who had been discharged 2 days prior, and was now directing the household from a chair with her arm in a sling with an authority that had only improved in the interim. Marco stayed with us. He had not put his phone down since Sophia's text. He would not describe this as distraction, he was wrong. She asked if I'd like to get coffee, he told me, for the 3rd time at the kitchen counter at 2 in the afternoon. Coffee. That's a normal thing. Daytime coffee. That's not a complicated signal. It's not a complicated signal. I agreed. It's daytime. Yes, daytime coffee is. Marco, I said. Say yes to the coffee. He looked at his phone. What if I'm bad at coffee? You're not bad at coffee. You're bad at protein bars. He considered this. That's fair. He typed something, set the phone down, picked it up, set it back down. Luca climbed onto the stool beside him and handed him the rabbit with the generous, inexplicable sympathy of a child who has decided someone needs comfort. Marco looked at the rabbit. Thanks, kid, he said quietly. Luca patted his arm. The news came through at 4. Marco took the call, his expression shifting into the professional one and back out of it in about 10 seconds. He looked at me and said, Edmondo is in custody. The operation is done. I breathed. Dante? Unharmed. I breathed again, and the second breath was a different kind. Vincenzo? I asked. A pause. Dante dealt with Vincenzo personally, before the main operation. I understood what that meant and what it didn't. Is he alive? Marco said. It wasn't that kind of dealing. I think Dante wanted an answer more than anything else. He wanted to understand. He paused. I don't know if he got it. Dante came back to the compound at 6. Not hurt. Same. Suit. Contained. Unchanged on the outside. But something in the quality of his stillness was different from his usual kind. More settled. More finished. He went to Luca first. I watched from the doorway while he sat on the floor of Luca's room and let his son climb on him with complete physical confidence. The way children are with people they have decided are entirely theirs. And felt the complicated thing in my chest do what it did with increasing frequency around. These two people. Later, after Luca was in bed, Dante found me in the kitchen. I was making bread. Not for any reason except that the dough needed to be worked, and the rhythm of it was the only thing that made my hands feel useful. "It's over," he said. 2 words. Everything they were carrying. "Vincenzo," I said. "He told me about his son." The whole of it. Dante sat at the island. He was right that his son's death was connected to a decision I made. He was wrong that I had known. A pause. "I didn't know." "I know that doesn't matter." "It matters a little," I said. "It doesn't bring him back." "No." We were quiet. "I'm not the same," Dante said. "I should tell you that. Not dramatically. Just, I am not the man who sat in that office 2 years ago and decided to believe a lie rather than trust you. I have been sitting with that for a long time." I turned the dough. "I know you're not," I said. "I want you to know what I'm asking for," he said. "When I ask for another chance, I'm not asking you to pretend the 2 years didn't happen. I'm asking if what we have now, what we have built in this disaster of a month, is worth trying to keep." I pressed my knuckles into the dough. "Yes," I said. Not elaborated, not explained. Just yes. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Okay." Outside, the compound settled into its nighttime sounds. Inside, Rosa moved through the hallway humming something low. Upstairs, Luca slept with his rabbit and his green socks and his father's eyes. I turned the bread. It was over. The weeks after were ordinary. This was the strangest part. The compound ran on its rhythms. Rosa presided with her sling, and then without it, Marco went to coffee with Sophia on a Wednesday and came back with the expression of a man who has discovered that things he'd convinced himself were complicated were actually quite simple if you simply sat in front of them. "She's funny," he told me, with the slightly stunned look of someone encountering a pleasant surprise. She made a joke about hospital administration, and I laughed. Out loud, with my actual face. "That's what laughing is," I said. "I know that," he said. "I'd just forgotten." I reopened Fior di Farina. Julia had managed the interim with competence and a long list of questions I worked through in 2 days. The wedding cake was remade, the bride was understanding, which was more grace than I deserved, and the almond croissant order resumed, and the cafe on Corso Magenta did not switch suppliers. I brought Luca to the shop on Fridays. He sat on the counter and watched me work with the religious attention he gave to anything involving dough, which I suspected was encoded in his genetics, because Dante had exactly the same quality of focus when he was observing something he wanted to understand. I started going back to the compound on weekends. Not as a guest, not under security protocol, just because it was where Dante was and Luca had decided it was his second home and his rabbit lived in the room Rosa had made for him. I had not said the word home about it yet, but I was thinking it. One evening in December, cold, early dark, Luca in bed upstairs, I was in the kitchen making something unnecessary, which was my way, and Dante was at the island working through papers in the comfortable silence we had discovered we were capable of. He put the papers down. I looked up. He reached into his jacket pocket. He placed something on the island between us. A ring, simple, old, the kind of thing that had been in a family longer than it had been in anyone's pocket. Not large, not flashy, just real, in the way that old things are real, carrying years without announcing them. "My grandmother's," he said. "My mother left it to me when she died. I've had it for 11 years and I've never known what to do with it." I looked at the ring. "Dante, I'm not doing this well," he said. "I'm aware." He looked at the ring, then at me. "I'm not asking you to marry me because it's the next logical step, or because of Luca, or because of the past month. I'm asking you because I would like to spend the rest of my life in whatever kitchen you're using, watching you make things you don't need to make, and that is the most honest thing I know how to say." I looked at him. He was not performing, not making a speech. He was sitting at my kitchen island telling me a true thing in the plainest words he had. "I know what your world is," I said. "I'm not pretending it's going to be easy. I know, and I need you to trust me. If you get information about me, or from me, or that involves me, you come to me first. Not a conclusion. Me." "Yes," he said. No hesitation. No qualification. And Luca. Luca is my son, he said. That is permanent and unconditional and separate from every other question on the table. I looked at the ring. I looked at this man who had thrown me out and driven 140 kilometers at 4 a.m. and sat beside a hospital bed all night and held my son's hand and pressed his palms to my face in a compound driveway and let me tape a bandage on his wrist and sat on the floor of a toddler's room and been climbed on. Fiamma, he said. The word had no cold in it. None left, not even the memory of cold, just warmth, entirely warmth, said the way you say something you have said in your own head 1,000 times and are finally saying aloud. Like it had always been the word. Like it had always meant this. I picked up the ring, held it for a moment. Okay, I said. He smiled. Not a large smile. Dante's smiles were never large. But it reached something behind his eyes that had been working toward the surface for weeks, and seeing it fully now, I understood it had been working toward this for a long time. Okay, he said. He did not put the ring on my finger. He let me do it myself. That felt right. Exactly right. Rosa appeared in the doorway approximately 45 seconds later, with the expression of a woman who had been in the hallway and was not even slightly sorry about it, and said, "I'll make coffee," and disappeared. Marco texted me at 10 o'clock that night. Sophia says yes, by the way. Just so you know. Everyone is saying yes tonight, apparently. Something in the water. Then a second text, "I'm going to tell my mother. She'll cry. I might also cry, don't tell Dante." I showed Dante the texts. He read them. Said nothing. But the smile came back. It was a Sunday in June when it happened again. Luca had been in the garden since after breakfast. He had discovered that the compound had a corner near the old stone wall where the light came in at a specific angle he found deeply satisfying, and he had been spending his mornings there with various excavation projects. The rabbit serving as site supervisor. Dante was in the garden too, nominally reviewing something on a tablet, actually watching Luca work with the specific quality of attention that had replaced the careful restraint of the hospital's early days. He was learning to be a father. I was watching him learn. It was one of the better things I had ever been given to witness. I was on the bench near the garden wall. I was doing nothing in particular. This was the thing I had been learning, to be in a space without needing my hands busy. It was slow work. I was not a natural. But the June sun was doing something specific to the garden, something warm and unhurried, and Luca was making sound effects for his excavation, and I had a cup of tea gone lukewarm and I didn't mind. I realized, at rest. I wasn't tracking exits. I wasn't calculating contingencies. I was sitting in a garden in the sun, watching my son and the man I had married 3 months ago at a small ceremony that Rosa had cried through, and Marco had photographed with the seriousness of a man on assignment. And I was simply at rest. At some point, this stillness must have deepened. I don't know when, but I became aware of warmth on my face and the garden sounds coming back from somewhere further away, and I opened my eyes. Dante was sitting beside me on the bench. He was looking at me with that expression. The one I knew now, the one he got when I did the thing no one else in his world did. "I fell asleep," I said. "About 20 minutes," he said. "In the garden." "In the garden." I looked at him. "You're doing the thing." "What thing?" "The thing where you look at me like I've done something that broke something in you." He was quiet for a moment. "You've always done this," he said. "You fall asleep in the middle of things. In offices. In hospital chairs. In gardens." He paused. "In a world full of people who are afraid of everything all the time, you fall asleep." "I'm not brave," I said. "I just trust you." "I know," he said. "That's the thing. That's always been the thing, Fiamma." The word settled over the garden like the warmth of it. "You trusted me before I gave you a reason. And even after I gave you reasons not to. You gave me a reason again," I said. "Eventually. Took longer than it should have." "Yes." He reached into the breast pocket of his shirt. He took out a white handkerchief, the same one, or one exactly like it, immaculate and precisely folded. He held it out. "My eyes are fine," I said. "I know," he said. He wasn't offering it for tears. I took it. He looked across the garden. Luca had discovered something in his excavation, a worm, based on the level of his excitement, and was presenting it to the rabbit for inspection with the solemn formality of a child conducting something important. "Papa," Luca called. "Worm." "I see it," Dante said. Luca considered the worm's optimal location and placed it carefully on the stone wall, where it could, in his estimation, be more comfortable. Then he picked up the handkerchief from where I'd set it on the bench beside me and tied it loosely around his own small wrist with the tremendous seriousness he brought to all his projects, not well, but with absolute commitment, the way he tied everything. He examined his wrist with great satisfaction, then went back to his excavation. Dante watched him. The handkerchief was too large for a 2-year-old's wrist. It hung there, slipping toward his fingers. Luca paid this no attention. The worm was the important thing. "He looks like you when he does that," I said. "Does he?" "When he decides something is settled." I watched my son. "He just decides. No second guessing." Dante's hand found mine on the bench. "He has your stubbornness," he said. "He has your jaw." "He has your stubbornness," Dante said again, with great conviction. I laughed. It was the most ordinary sound, warm and unguarded in the June garden, with my tea gone cold and Luca explaining something to the rabbit, and Dante's thumb moving in a slow arc across the back of my hand. Ordinary. Completely, radically ordinary. I thought about the hospital corridor at 4 a.m., the chair outside room 204, a man who had driven 140 kilometers and arrived in a suit, immaculate, and held out a white handkerchief to a woman who had not believed he would come. A boy who said "Papa" into an oxygen mask with the certainty of someone too young for doubt. We had survived this. Not cleanly. There were costs still being paid, parts of what we had been through that had settled into us rather than leaving. Dante was not the same man. I was not the same woman. Some days I sat with the weight of the world we had chosen, and I did not pretend the weight was light. But there was also this bench, this garden, this man's hand, this boy's laugh, the handkerchief loose around a small wrist in the June sun. "Fiamma," Dante said, just to say it, just to have said it. "I know," I said. The worm apparently had been very interesting. The sun moved across the garden, slow and unhurried, and I did not close my eyes again. I didn't need to. I was already in the safest place I knew.